Brace yourself for a journey into one of the most haunting places on Earth, Chernobyl. This radioactive ghost town is filled with chilling relics and strange occurrences that defy explanation.
There's 1 millisievert.
It's gonna fall in. Don't fall in.
From creepy dolls abandoned in empty nurseries to unsettling reports of a headless moose running through the wasteland, every corner holds a new mystery. What other strange sights have been witnessed in this radioactive ghost town? Could something even more terrifying be waiting to be found? One thing is certain. What they discovered in Chernobyl shocked the world.
5.4.
Whoa, that's really high now.
This is 10 times higher than normal, and it will remain like so bad for thousands of years.
Number 10. Pripyat City Hospital. The walls of Pripyat City Hospital have seen both life and tragedy. What was once a place of healing now stands as a silent witness to one of history's worst nuclear disasters. Decay has set in, but the past still lingers in the air, heavy with the weight of what happened here. Located on Druzhby-Narodov Street, near the first micro-district, the hospital was once a key part of a larger medical complex. It had 410 beds, with various clinics and outpatient buildings spread across several interconnected structures. A message on the hospital's roof once stood as a proud declaration: "Health of the nation, the country's wealth." Now, those words mean little in a place where health is no longer possible. On the night of the Chernobyl explosion, this hospital became the first stop for many who had no idea what they were walking into. Firefighters and plant workers arrived, suffering from severe burns and an invisible enemy, radiation. Many of them had no clue how much danger they were in. According to a 2006 World Health Organization report, 237 people developed acute radiation sickness, and 28 died within the first 3 months. Most were the first responders, those who had rushed toward the disaster instead of away from it. In the rush to treat the incoming patients, medical staff left tools and documents scattered across the hospital. Everything was abandoned in place when it became clear just how deadly the environment had become. Even now, remnants of that night remain. Nature has started reclaiming what was left behind. Trees have grown unchecked in front of the entrance, but they don't grow straight. Radiation has interfered with their natural sense of direction, leaving them twisted at odd angles. Inside, moss and rust have overtaken the once clean lobby. Mold creeps along the walls, feeding on the years of neglect. But there is one place in the hospital where time seems frozen: the basement. It is considered the most dangerous location in all of Pripyat. This is where the clothing of the first responders was hastily dumped after they had returned from the burning reactor. Their boots, helmets, and uniforms still lie where they were left, untouched for decades. The levels of radiation in that space are dangerously high, even now. The hospital was abandoned just days after the disaster. The contamination inside made it impossible to continue using the facility. Now, it stands as a haunting relic of that night, a place where the past refuses to be forgotten. Number 9. Giant catfish. Something strange is happening in the waters of Chernobyl. The rivers that once carried death after the nuclear disaster now hold massive catfish, far bigger than they should be. These creatures thrive in a place where life was supposed to end. But how? And what does their survival mean? When the Chernobyl reactor exploded, it sent radioactive material into the air, contaminating everything in its path. The Pripyat River, once teeming with fish, became a wasteland. Radiation poisoned the water, killing off most aquatic life. For years, nothing could survive there. Scientists believed the ecosystem was ruined beyond repair. Yet, decades later, something remarkable has happened. Reports have surfaced of giant catfish living in the contaminated waters, not just big, but massive. Some reach lengths of up to 12 feet. For comparison, the average catfish grows to around 4 feet. These fish are almost 3 times that size. How is this possible? One possible explanation lies in the radiation itself. The explosion released radionuclides into the water. Radionuclides are unstable atoms that carry high levels of radioactive energy. These atoms can trigger unpredictable effects, causing mutations and abnormal growth in living things. In humans, exposure can lead to cancer, organ failure, or death. But for the catfish in this contaminated water, the effects have been something entirely different. Scientists studying them were shocked to find that, despite their size, they appear perfectly healthy. No signs of extra limbs, tumors, or obvious deformities. Just abnormally large, thriving fish. How could radiation, known for its destructive effects, cause this? Some researchers believe the answer lies in the unique environment of the Pripyat River. With no human activity and few natural predators, these catfish have no threats. They eat whatever they want, grow at an accelerated rate, and continue to dominate the waters. It's a scenario unlike anything seen before. But here is where things get even stranger. It's not just the catfish. Other wildlife in the area, bears, wild boars, and even lynx, have been seen drinking from the contaminated river. By all logic, they should be suffering from radiation poisoning. But they are not. They seem completely unaffected. Could it be that certain species are adapting to radiation? Is nature finding a way to survive in conditions once thought impossible? Of course, this resilience doesn't apply to humans. Radiation exposure remains deadly for people. After the disaster, 3 Russian divers entered the radioactive waters in an attempt to prevent further contamination. Within 2 weeks, all 3 were dead. Their bodies simply couldn't handle the exposure. Even today, drinking water with high radiation levels can lead to cancer, organ failure, and a slow, painful death. Yet, while human life struggles against radiation, the catfish of Chernobyl are thriving. Are they evolving into something new? Have they developed a resistance to radiation? Or are they simply growing unchecked because of their isolation? Scientists will continue to study these catfish, but for now, they remain one of Chernobyl's greatest mysteries. One thing is certain though, you probably wouldn't want to eat one. Number 8. Elephant's foot. 8 months after the nuclear accident at the Chernobyl power plant in Ukraine in April 1986, a team of workers entered a corridor underneath the damaged number 4 reactor. They found something that no one could have expected. In that low, narrow passage, they discovered a dark, flowing substance that resembled lava. It looked as though it had poured out from the reactor core, much like a man-made eruption. One of the hardened clumps in the flow was so unusual that the crew later said it reminded them of an elephant's foot. This mysterious mass became known by the nickname elephant's foot. The name came from its large, wrinkled appearance. However, there was much more to this object than just its unusual look. Elephant's foot was formed by a mix of materials that had melted together during the accident. The ingredients included molten concrete, sand, steel, uranium, and zirconium. In the chaos of the meltdown, these components were heated to extreme temperatures, causing them to fuse. The mixture managed to melt through at least 2 meters of reinforced concrete. It then flowed through various pipes and cracks before settling in that long, eerie hallway. As soon as the workers encountered this formation, their instruments warned them of a grave danger. Sensors showed that the radiation from the dark mass was so intense that anyone standing near it would receive a fatal dose in just 5 minutes. The alarm bells were loud and clear, and the danger was real. This high level of radiation made any close study extremely risky. Because of the intense radiation, scientists had to be very careful. They did not send a person in close contact immediately. Instead, they set up a camera on a wheel to take photos from a safe distance. Some researchers managed to get close enough to gather a few samples for further study. When they analyzed the material, they found something unexpected. The substance was not merely the remnants of nuclear fuel as many had assumed. Instead, the experts explained that the mass was made up of corium. This is a very rare material created only under extreme conditions. Corium forms during a nuclear accident when the nuclear fuel and parts of the reactor's inner structure become extremely hot and start to melt. In this very dangerous process, they combine to create a thick, heavy mixture. This is not a common event. In fact, scientists have only recorded the natural formation of corium 5 times. There was one instance during the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania back in 1979. Then came the formation at Chernobyl, and 3 more occurred during the Fukushima Daiichi disaster in Japan in 2011. Each time, the formation of corium marked a turning point in the understanding of nuclear accidents. Over the years, something curious happened to Elephant's Foot. As time passed, the radioactive elements in the mass began to decay naturally. This decay meant that the material slowly lost some of its original strength. The deadly radiation levels that once made it nearly impossible for any person to get near gradually decreased. This change opened up the possibility for more detailed study. In later years, scientists, cleanup crews, and even photographers were able to visit the site and take a closer look. Capturing images of Elephant's Foot was a challenging task. The threat of radiation was still very real, and every visit to the area carried its risks. But there was another challenge as well: collecting samples. In the early days after the accident, the material was extremely hard and dense. Researchers reported that they had to use a Kalashnikov assault rifle to chip off small pieces of the substance for analysis. The idea that one would use such an instrument in a scientific setting sounds almost unbelievable. Yet, it was a necessary measure to understand what was happening inside that deadly mass. However, as the years went by, the nature of Elephant's Foot changed. Along with the decline in its radiation, the material itself softened. It no longer stayed as a rock-hard block. Instead, recent reports have described it as having a texture similar to sand. This change made the task of sampling much easier and less dangerous than it had once been. Researchers no longer needed to resort to extreme measures. The mass had softened in a way that allowed closer study with more conventional techniques. Even with these changes, many questions remain about what this mass represents and how it might continue to evolve. Number 7. The abandoned amusement park. On the surface, it looks like an amusement park waiting for visitors. But step closer, and the silence tells a different story. Many people do not know that the Pripyat amusement park was still under construction on April 26, 1986. It had not been finished and was never officially opened. The plan was to welcome guests on May Day. Instead, after the Chernobyl disaster, the park turned into a silent symbol of lost potential. The park was meant to bring joy with its many attractions. It was designed to include an 8 5-foot Ferris wheel, a parachute ride, bumper cars, boat swings, and a shooting gallery. In the Soviet Union, many cities built similar parks. Residents often called these places parks of culture and rest. Although some of those parks are still open, Pripyat Park never got its proper day. It did open for a short time on April 27th before evacuation orders came later that day. Locals had felt a surge of excitement at the thought of visiting the fairgrounds. Even though most rides were not ready for use, people gathered with high hopes of enjoying a day of fun. The air was filled with anticipation as families dreamed of laughter and bright colors. However, disaster had other plans. The park's incomplete state soon became a stark sign of how quickly normal life could vanish. Today, the park stands alone and quiet. The bumper cars remain exactly where they were abandoned, with dry leaves swirling slowly around them. The Ferris wheel is stuck in its final position, its metal frame creaking ever so softly in the wind. Parts of the ride have lost their paint, and the remaining yellow canopies are only partially vibrant. Much of the structure is dominated by an orange tone that comes from rust and neglect. This faded look hints at the park's tragic past and leaves many wondering what might have been. There is a strange mix of feelings when you look at the park. The quiet sounds of creaking metal and the soft rustling of wind through the empty rides create a powerful atmosphere. The park now tells a tale of a dream that was never fulfilled. Everything remains as it was, but nothing is the same. Number 6. The Red Forest. In the forests surrounding Chernobyl, nature has taken an unusual turn. Animals roam freely, plants continue to grow, but something isn't right. Decay, the natural process that breaks down dead matter, seems to be slowing down in certain areas. It's almost as if time itself has stalled in the most contaminated parts of the exclusion zone. Since 1991, researchers have been studying how radiation affects the organisms responsible for decomposition. Insects, fungi, and microbes play a crucial role in recycling nutrients back into the ecosystem. However, some of these decomposers show signs of radiation damage. One of the most striking examples of this is an area known as the Red Forest. This section of woodland earned its name after the meltdown, when an entire cluster of pine trees turned a deep red color before withering away. Usually, fallen trees decompose within a decade, but here, something unusual happened. Even 15 to 20 years after the disaster, the trees remained mostly intact. Scientists found this odd, so they decided to investigate further. To test decomposition rates, researchers filled garbage bags with fallen leaves from clean areas. They made sure no insects or decomposers were present. Then, they placed some bags in uncontaminated parts of the exclusion zone and others in areas with high radiation levels. The bags were left outside for almost a year. The results were clear. In the clean areas, nature worked as expected. Between 70 and 90% of the leaves had broken down, turning into nutrient-rich matter. But in the radioactive zones, something was off. The leaves in those areas still had 60% of their original weight, meaning the decomposers weren't doing their job. This discovery raised a serious concern. If the natural process of decomposition is slowing down, then nutrients aren't cycling properly. This could explain why tree growth in these areas seems stunted. But there is a bigger problem. The dry, undecayed leaves piling up on the forest floor could turn into a serious fire hazard. A forest fire in this region wouldn't just be an ordinary wildfire. Burning leaves and wood in a radioactive area could send contaminated particles into the air, spreading radiation beyond the exclusion zone. The wind could carry radioactive ash for miles, affecting areas far outside of Chernobyl. For now, scientists continue to monitor the situation, but the risks remain. How much of an impact this slowed decomposition will have in the long run is still unknown. What is certain, though, is that nature in Chernobyl doesn't behave the way it should, and the consequences could reach far beyond the abandoned city. Now, it is time for today's subscriber's pick. What you are looking at is something straight out of a horror movie. A group of soldiers, fully geared up, are seen carrying what appears to be a horrifying humanoid creature on a stretcher. Its skin looks stretched and rotten, with deep wounds covering its body. What they discovered in Chernobyl shocked the world. Could this be proof of something lurking in the exclusion zone? Some believe that radiation has given birth to terrifying mutations, while others claim it's all part of a secret experiment gone wrong. The second image zooms in, showing the creature's face twisted in a disturbing expression. But the real question is, what do you think this is? A bizarre hoax, a movie prop, or something more sinister? And if it were real, what would it mean for what's really hiding in places the world has abandoned? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Number 5. Dolls of Pripyat. There is something unsettling about dolls. Even in broad daylight, they can look frozen in time. Stiff limbs, empty eyes, and eerie expressions that never change. That is probably why horror movies like Child's Play and Annabelle have always attracted large audiences. But when these toys are left behind in a place abandoned after disaster, their lifelessness takes on a whole new meaning. When the Chernobyl disaster struck in April 1986, the city of Pripyat was evacuated almost overnight. Residents were informed that their absence would be temporary, and most believed they would return soon. In the rush to escape, families left behind everything they owned. Children, caught in the middle of play, had to leave their beloved toys exactly where they were. Homes, schools, and nurseries suddenly stood empty as cherished playthings were abandoned. Little girls had placed their precious dolls in imaginative positions that only a child could create. Over time, these once beloved toys were warped by exposure to the elements and high radiation levels, their features distorted in ways that make them even more unsettling. But not all of them were left exactly as they were. Over the years, visitors, especially those drawn to abandoned places and eerie sights, have moved some of these dolls, and they have arranged them to heighten their disturbing effect. Some were placed in windows, their hollow eyes staring out as if watching for someone who will never return. Others were positioned to hold each other, as if seeking comfort in a world that had suddenly gone silent. Some were even propped up wearing gas masks. It is impossible to know which dolls remained untouched and which were staged, but the effect is the same. Their presence is proof of the lives that were uprooted in an instant, the childhoods interrupted, and the ordinary moments frozen in time. Some dolls now sit crumbling in the ruins, their faces cracked and peeling from radiation exposure. Others lie peacefully in rusted cribs, their eyes still open as if waiting for someone to come back and finish the game they never got to complete. Even decades later, these forgotten toys still remain, silent witnesses to a disaster that changed everything. Number 4. Mutated animals of Chernobyl. Right after the Chernobyl disaster, one question stood out. What would happen to the animals? People expected the worst. Radiation had already taken countless human lives, causing cancer and birth defects. The assumption was that wildlife would suffer the same fate. Some scientists even believed the area would be lifeless for centuries. But something unexpected happened. Life didn't just return. It came back much faster than anyone predicted. Within years, animals were roaming the exclusion zone again. Forests grew over abandoned streets, and creatures that had once fled started to reclaim their territory. For many, it raised a strange question. Could nature actually be thriving in a place humans had written off as unlivable? But not everything was normal. Scientists studying the area quickly realized that radiation had left its mark. 10 years after the meltdown, reports started surfacing about animals born with severe mutations. Some were hard to believe. There were creatures with extra heads, twisted limbs, and faces that looked like they belonged in a horror movie. There were stories of a cat with 2 faces, a lamb with 8 legs, and a calf with legs growing from its back. Not every animal showed visible signs of radiation exposure. Some seemed perfectly fine, living in an environment that was supposed to be deadly. Researchers found that while some species adapted, others struggled. Many birds, for example, had shorter lifespans, and some insects that were common before the disaster never fully returned. Despite the mutations and health issues, wildlife continued to spread. Wolves, deer, and wild boars now roam freely where people once lived. Some scientists argue that the absence of humans has done more for these animals than the radiation has harmed them. Others worry that the long-term effects are still unknown. So, is Chernobyl a disaster zone or an accidental nature reserve? The answer isn't simple. Life has found a way to survive, but at what cost? Some animals appear untouched, while others bear the scars of an invisible enemy. And even today, scientists are still trying to understand what Chernobyl's wildlife can tell us about the true impact of radiation. Number 3. Radiation-eating fungus. Radiation is deadly to most living things. It damages DNA, causes mutations, and makes environments uninhabitable for centuries. But in the ruins of Chernobyl, something unexpected was thriving. Something that could change the future of space travel. The explosion of reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near Pripyat, Ukraine, remains the worst nuclear disaster in history. The 30-kilometer exclusion zone around the site is still too dangerous for humans to live in. Even decades later, high radiation levels make it one of the most toxic places on Earth. Yet, in this radioactive landscape, scientists found a black fungus called Cladosporium sphaerospermum. When researchers examined the remains of reactor number 4, they noticed dark patches spreading across its walls. Instead of being destroyed by radiation, this fungus seemed to be thriving in it. Scientists were puzzled. How could any living thing survive in conditions so extreme? The answer lies in the way Cladosporium interacts with radiation. Unlike most life forms, which are damaged by high radiation levels, this fungus actually feeds on it. The process is known as radiosynthesis, similar to how plants use photosynthesis to convert sunlight into energy. This discovery raised an interesting question. If the fungus could withstand radiation on Earth, could it do the same in space? Radiation is a major problem for astronauts. Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field protect us from harmful cosmic rays, but space is a different story. NASA scientists have long been aware that astronauts on the International Space Station are exposed to 20 times more radiation than we experience on Earth. High radiation levels pose a serious threat to both humans and equipment, making long-term space travel extremely risky. After learning about cladosporium and its ability to absorb radiation, NASA decided to test it in space. A sample of the fungus was sent to the International Space Station, where it was studied for a month. The results were astonishing. The fungus wasn't just surviving in space, it was actively blocking radiation by eating it. Researchers discovered that its melanin-rich cells were transforming harmful gamma rays into chemical energy, shielding the area around it. This breakthrough could have major implications for future space missions. Scientists are now considering using cladosporium to create a biological radiation shield for astronauts. If a layer of this fungus could grow on the walls of spacecraft or Mars habitats, it could help protect crews from dangerous cosmic radiation. Even more promising, researchers believe the fungus might be useful for cleaning up radioactive waste on Earth. Number 2. Stalkers. Some people seek adventure in the most dangerous places. In Chernobyl, a group known as stalkers does just that. They risk radiation exposure, law enforcement, and the unknown, all for the thrill of stepping into a world frozen in time. Stalkers illegally enter the 1,000 square kilometer exclusion zone surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They claim to be drawn by curiosity, but their motives vary. Some want to see the abandoned buildings before nature reclaims them. Others search for relics of the past, untouched since the disaster. Then there are those who treat it as an extreme sport, pushing themselves to explore deeper into the forbidden zone. Experts have different views on why this subculture emerged. Some believe it stems from a long history of oppression in Soviet times, mixed with the wave of commercialism that followed the USSR's collapse. Economic struggles in Ukraine and Russia may have also played a role, giving young people few outlets for adventure. The idea of Chernobyl as a mysterious, dangerous wasteland became even more popular in 2007. That year, a Ukrainian team of game developers released Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl. This is a first-person shooter set in a fictionalized version of the zone. The title stands for Scavengers, Trespassers, Adventurers, Loners, Killers, Explorers, and Robbers. The developers said their goal was to bring global attention to Chernobyl while also making an immersive video game. They succeeded. Stalker became a hit, selling over 5 million copies and spawning multiple sequels. It gained a strong following, especially in Russia and Eastern Europe. The game's success had an unexpected effect. It romanticized the idea of venturing into the exclusion zone and made the real-life experience seem like an adventure straight out of a video game. As a result, more people began sneaking in, eager to experience the eerie, abandoned landscape for themselves. Authorities try to stop them, but it is a constant game of cat and mouse. Guards patrol the area, fines are handed out, and yet, people keep coming. The risk doesn't seem to scare them. For some, it is the danger that makes it worth it. Number 1. Headless moose. Strange things have been caught on camera in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, but few are as unsettling as the so-called headless moose. The eerie footage, captured near an abandoned railway track, shows a large animal moving across the tracks. At first, it looks like an ordinary moose, until you notice what's missing: its head. The footage shows the animal moving naturally. It runs across the landscape without hesitation, but there is no visible head or neck, just an empty space where they should be. The way the animal moves suggests it isn't struggling or disoriented. It walks with purpose, as if completely unaware that it is missing such a vital part of its body. The video quickly spread across social media, sparking debate. Some believe it is evidence of extreme mutations caused by Chernobyl's lingering radiation. After all, the area has been known to produce some strange biological effects. Studies have shown genetic mutations in plants and animals, including deformities in birds and changes in the size of certain species. Could this be another bizarre result of prolonged exposure to radiation? Others argue that the headless moose is just an illusion. Some suggest that the head is simply out of the camera's frame, hidden by the angle or poor lighting. Then there are those who believe the video has been altered, possibly through digital editing or a simple camera glitch. Skeptics point out that moose are not commonly found in the Chernobyl area, though other large animals, such as elk and deer, have thrived in the absence of human activity. If the creature in the video isn't a moose, could it be a different animal with a similar body shape? Some even suggest it might be a rare case of a deformity or injury that somehow healed in an impossible way. Without more footage or a clearer image, the mystery remains unsolved. But the debate surrounding the video continues. Was this a strange trick of the light, a hoax, or something far more unsettling? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.